tagging it.
Yeah.
Like, what's up, son? I know you ain't in the past. You make people that live here. Check in.
Good, brother. Good.
Alright, so for me, like us being on this stoop in 2024 having this conversation is super prophetic because as kids, we spent tons of time on this stoop, right? I got an opportunity, obviously I know our history, but because we were going to have this conversation, I got an opportunity really to think back on some of our paradigms. And so, for example, we kind of both in the same space. In 7th grade, I ran for state treasurer. I mean, I said state treasurer, you see, state treasurer.
It felt like
It felt like, right. I ran for treasurer at SGA at Satellite East. And you were my campaign manager. Right. But the only reason you was my campaign manager is because of your computer skills.
That's
right.
That's right.
Right. You had the, what they call that, the dot printer.
Yeah, the dot matrix printer. I had the IBM PC, the green screen joint.
Right.
I could print out the flyers.
Right.
And put them on the wall.
So you printed me out a 6-foot joint, and it was like vote for Marlon Rice. We put it in front of Miss Murden's. We put it in front of Miss Murden's classroom, and it stayed there for a couple of days. But then people started tagging it, like "fuck Marlon" and all the stuff, right? And so Miss Corbett made us take. You remember that Miss Corbett made us take it down because she was like, "Yo, why y'all leave it up? Like, why you just, So, where did you start? Like, I mean, for me, your connectivity with computers started then. But for you, where did it start? Like, where did this journey start for you?
Well, I mean, so even the fact that you're bringing up the stoop, but my mom's used to, if you remember, used to work at the IBM factory
exactly.
right there on DeKalb.
Right.
It's I think it's still the Home Depot.
Well, no, it's right next to the Home Depot. It's like Job Corps now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was so Mom Dukes used to work at the IBM factory. And so she was in HR, and so whenever we were sick or anything like that, back in the day, there wasn't, you had to bring your kids to the job with you.
Right. So you was going to work with Mom Dukes.
I was going to work with Mom Dukes when I was sick. And
right.
So they used to eat good. There was a Chinese spot we go to, Kun Cab. So they used to order from Kun Cab all the time. So I used to hang out with the dudes that was ordering the Chinese food, which was the dudes putting the chips together in the factory in the basement.
Wow.
So I just used to be down there eating with them, but then learning about computers and chips. And then that's where my love for computers came in at. And then my mom's taught me how to program. And then from there on.
So I even remember that early stages of programming, like being in 9th grade at Tech, and you be in those computer classrooms, which were the only classrooms that had AC, and you would have to do like MS-DOS, and it was like boom, boom, and then run, and that was like basic programming.
But the thing is, and this is key to a lot of the success that we see with people who have made it big in the industry, whether it's Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or any of these billionaire founders, is you get introduced to something at the school, but when you come home, is it at your home?
Right.
And for a lot of us growing up in Bed-Stuy, it wasn't at our homes. It was at mine. So I was able to learn at Sat East, but then come home and just spend hours plowing away. So that's partly where.
That's like that Malcolm Gladwell, that 10,000 hour piece, right? So you were kind of getting it in the school, getting it at home, getting it at Mom Duke's job. We leave Tech, you go to Lincoln, I go to Morgan. And at some point, you really like focused in on your positioning in that space, that computer, that technology space. What were some of the things, because I mean, I know kind of what you went through in college and the impetus behind some of your centering yourself and some of your focus, but what were some of the things that made you recognize, like, look, this is the trajectory of my life, this is where I'm headed?
Well, so it was a couple of things. One is, when we was coming up, and especially when you come up in Bed-Stuy, you get exposed to a lot of stuff. And so you feel like you want to try a lot of stuff out, whether with you, it was rap, DJing,
right, partying, right, all the
stuff,
shit, right.
And for me, it was like, remember basketball. Remember, I played football at Tech for a little bit, and we did the whole football Tech thing. But I was exposed to a lot of sports, and so I was into sports heavy. So once I hit undergrad, like that's when it hits you like a ton of bricks. Like, oh, I ain't going nowhere with this.
Right.
I'm at a Division III undergrad. Right. I'm playing sports here. There's nothing happening. So I was able to put that to the side, and because I was able to I knew sports wasn't going to be anything post-Lincoln. It was like, all right, let me dump everything into this one basket, which is my other love, computer science. But then, so that's one angle. The second is, this is where I figured something out about myself that I had not known up to this point, which is I was addicted to being challenged beyond what I thought that I could do. So this is when computer science got real complex. So now it got really hard, and I started to get this addiction to actually going back to my dorm room and spending hours upon hours just trying to figure problems out. Right. And I got addicted to that. And then, so that's for me when I was like, oh yeah, this is my lane.
Right. And I was going to ask you, like, what is the thing, right? Like, what is the thing? What is the catch? So for me, like you mentioned, like all the things I did, like from hip hop, rhyming, DJing, but for me, the catch was I just always wanted to be part of the culture. Yeah. Like I just really just always wanted to be in hip hop. Like, I danced when DJ Smooth C used to take me to them crazy parties. Yeah. I would dance. I ain't no dancer, right? For me, the catch was Marlon just wants to be centered in culture, right? He just wants to be a part of that thing that makes him feel good. Right. So for you, with regards to it, what was the catch? I know that you're a master at like data, right? But what was it about it? You saying it was the challenges?
It was the challenge, but really, there was a situation when I was an intern. So when I was in undergrad, I was an intern at Motorola.
I remember.
And there was two things that happened. The summer before I became an intern at Motorola, dudes here was cloning, remember those big phones, big Motorola phones? They was cloning the Motorola phones. And then some folks came to me and was like, yo, we know you're in computer science. Can you help us hack these phones? Right. And we heard you going, because I hadn't left for my internship. So it was like, we heard you going to Motorola for your internship. So one, I felt like for the first time, my skill sets connected me to like where I was from. Right. You know what I mean? So so there, a love, like a connection. And so that seeped in. Then second, so here's the story. And I don't even know if I ever told you this story. So when I was an intern, I was the first ever intern at Motorola from an HBCU. First ever. And so,
which is crazy, because this is like, we're talking 98, 99, and you're the first ever from an HBCU.
Intern from an HBCU. And so, there was dudes from Yale, Harvard, MIT, all of these interns from all of these areas. And so they used to challenge those of us who felt like, we was not on their same level. They would challenge us, right? They would charge us up all the time. Like, what do you know about computer science? And during lunch, all of this, ask all of these crazy questions. But the interns used to always, after school, after work, used to always go and play ball. Because Motorola had this big campus, so we would always play ball. So I was always on the defensive on the computer science side, because I felt like I'm from an HBCU, I don't have what they have. And so they used to always challenge me. But then we would play ball, and that was my shit. So I was on top of the game. And when I realized the same dudes that made me feel uncomfortable and nervous when I'm on the ball court, these is the same dudes that I'm owning.
You're scrapping them.
And I'm barking at them, and I'm sunning them. Right. So that's when I realized. So then from that point, I understood what the equation was, which was I have to feel as comfortable in the computer science space as I have in sports and everything else.
From that kind of jewel that you realized, this kind of juxtaposition of you feeling I don't want to say inadequate, but maybe overwhelmed, right?
Inadequate and overwhelmed.
On the one end, but then understanding that these same people, I can also give them that same feeling in my space.
Right.
You've done so much in the field. And again, it's crazy, right? Because like you and I are lifelong friends.
Yeah.
And when it was happening, it didn't seem like a lot. Like, you know, it's like when your man do something, you'd be like, okay, you know, he got the White House Fellowship, yeah, now that's what's up, right?
Right.
But you're in a space now where without question, you are one of the leaders with regards to black men in the tech space.
Yeah.
Tell me about your journey. Tell me about China. You living in China for a while. Like,
well, I mean, so that was the thing, right? Like, that's what propelled me a lot was, I felt like this was, you know, when we came up, there was always that poem, Road Less Traveled.
Right, the Road Less Traveled.
And so I always felt like this was something that differentiated me. Right. You know what I mean? Like, so when we was hanging out, like you said, when we was hanging out and doing our thing, everybody, there's a couple of dudes we would hang out with, all had their specialty. Right. And I felt like this was my specialty. So I felt like I wanted to keep moving in this space. And I felt like the more that I differentiated myself, the better. So it was like, nah, ain't nobody really doing this computer science thing, at least not from where we from. So I was like, that's my sign to keep going. Like, whenever I look around and I'm in a position where I'm moving, I was like, let me just keep going.
Keep going.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So like that's what kept me going in the space. But I think that I think you're right. Like, it's funny. So when I became a White House Fellow, you know, one of the things that they say is White House Fellows are people who have achieved a lot early on in their career. You know, so Westmore, the new governor of Maryland, was a White House Fellow. He was a White House Fellow like a few years prior to me. Colin Powell was a White House Fellow. There's tons of big deal people who are White House Fellows, but you have to show a lot of success early on in your career. But they also say White House Fellows are people who don't think about it. So it's like there are people who be tracking their successes.
Right.
And be like, I'm hot shit.
Right.
I'm gonna keep just doing things that make me hot shit. Right. Versus people who just keep their head down and just grind. And then one day you look up and you're like, fuck.
Right.
Like, I'm doing a lot here.
Right.
You know what I mean? So for me, it wasn't about counting your successes. It wasn't about tallying the successes. It was just about like, how do you keep your head down and grind? And then one day somebody wakes up and says, it's just like when you reached out to me to have this conversation. It's like somebody wakes up and says like, yo, you doing a lot. Let's talk about it. Right. But I don't sit back and say, yo, I'm doing a lot, so therefore let me see who want to talk to me about it.
Right. You don't chase it.
Nah, you don't chase it. You just got to keep your head down and grind.
Here's the funny thing though, and I don't think people really understand this about you, is that you are not. So this idea of success in community and this idea of ascension in industry, if you see a black man that's like in an industry that's like not germane to your day-to-day life, and you see him, it's like, oh, he must be different. Like he must have went to a good school. He must have been around white folk his whole, right? Yeah. But you are so much the antithetical part of that. Like, bro, you right where we at is right where you're from, right? And like all of the things that I've done, like you and I have talked about this. Like I put it on the Instagram. The first party I ever threw, and now people know me as like, oh, he's a king of block parties and he always gets it popping in Brooklyn. The first thing I ever threw was with you, right? And so, you know, there's this idea of, I want to ask you it in a way that, you know, that I feel it. It's like, did people ever feel like did you ever have to defend yourself? Like, wait a minute, I'm a real nigga. Like, what you talking about?
All the time. When people who have met me in the last 10, 15 years, I literally have to say like, yo, there was a time where my money wasn't right. There was things that I experienced.
Bro, we used to ass bet, rolling dice. One time you and me ass betting, we went into the dice game with no money, ass betting, got up like $150 and went to Coon Cows and got
some Chinese food.
Right.
We planned it at the Chinese restaurant, came back, got
right.
But, yeah, like, people who know me now can't fathom, but it's funny. It's funny that you and I are having this conversation because I always use you. Like, I always am like, so if you knew who my man growing up is, like if you knew who he was, you would be like, no way. There's no way y'all had the same upbringing. Because people look at me and say, like, you must have had exposure to this, you must have came from here, you must have had this, and so on and so forth.
They think you blue blood. Because that's the space that you in.
And I think I told you this, I always use the Fight Club analogy, because I'm like, you're like Tyler Durden, and I forgot the regular dude's name. I'm the square, and you're the person. So it was easy for me to come up in Brooklyn and focus on the things that I wanted to focus on, because I knew every time I got around you, we was gonna get into all of the fuck shit. So I never felt like I was missing out on Brooklyn shit. I was always doing Brooklyn shit because we was always together doing Brooklyn shit. Like you said, ass betting and dice games and all this other stuff. But I was able to go back and focus. So now, because now that became a larger part of my life, people assume like that's always been your life. This, you know, nerd, sort of heads down, studying kind of stuff. Nah, the reason why I was able to do that easily is because we was getting into the stuff we was getting into, you know, and I was able to kind of hold myself down and balance it. Exactly.
What do you do now? What's your work now look like?
So I'm the head of AI at the Bezos Earth Fund, which the Bezos Earth Fund is a $10 billion fund focused on taking on the climate challenge within this decisive decade. So Jeff Bezos said, I'm gonna take $10 billion of my own dollars and I'm gonna put it into this fund, and we're gonna get out $1 billion a year to organizations, companies, institutions, academic institutions and the like, who are thinking big things, big ideas about how to solve the climate and nature problems. So my job as the director of AI, so I run the whole AI portfolio, is to think about how modern AI can be used and applied to solve the climate and nature crisis, and then ultimately fund those organizations and grow those organizations so that they can use AI to solve climate and nature.
Now, before we started, I told you what my thought about this concept of AI, right? So again, I'm here in Bed-Stuy, Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, and AI in a lot of our black communities means the pictures that you see on social media, or it means Chat GPT, right? I saw your conversation with EYL, and that was kind of one of the things that sparked in me, like, we need to have this discussion, because do you feel like, well, first let's start off with the basis. What do you feel AI could mean with regards to a paradigm shift in black communities? Like, what is its usage, its implementation, creative references, protocols? Like, in terms of our state and our black community, what does AI mean? What are the potentials, and kind of where do we need to shore up with regards to it?
So that's a big question. Let me see if I can answer it from two different sides, from a theoretical sort of side, and then with a specific idea that I've been thinking about, but I think that gets to some portion of what you're talking about. So let me answer it from this theoretical concept. Son, just for the record, that's some shit Kim would do. Like, wave at whoever coming down the block. Like, Kim.
Nah, because you know, when I close off the block, all the bus drivers know me now, so they be like, yo, what up, son? You closing the block again?
That was some Kim shit. Like, waving at whoever coming through. So, all right, let me get theoretical. So the mental model that I use for us to think about, and it's specifically in the black community, think about AI, is go back to the gold rush, right? So in the gold rush, you had three types of entities. This is super reductive and simple, but this is how I played this mental model out in my head. You have what they refer to as the foundation companies, right? So for instance, Wells Fargo as a bank literally was invented because of the gold rush. Like, two white dudes whose last names was Wells and Fargo created and was like, look, y'all going in there and y'all getting all of this gold, y'all digging, y'all gonna need a trusted institution with which to store it and manage it for you. So let's start up a bank. And now, right? Levi and Strauss literally invented as a clothing company to support miners going in, right? Like that's how that clothing company came about. So there were all these what they call picks and shovels types of organizations. And they actually said the picks and shovels organizations actually made more money than the actual people who were mining for the gold.
Right.
Now, let's move that to modern times with AI. Who are the picks and shovels organizations? They call them hyperscalers. Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, NVIDIA, Meta. So these are the foundation companies. These are your infrastructure companies. They're investing in the supercomputers and the GPUs and all of the technology that's going to make AI usable and engageable. Amazon is also a hyperscaler. So they're going to do what they do, right? So now let's go back to the gold rush. So you have these foundation picks and shovels, right? Literally selling picks and shovels to people going in.
Right.
Then you had the people going in who was grinding on a day-to-day basis, mining, right? So we haven't really seen that yet, which is for us in modern day times for AI are these sort of startups, right? These small companies, these mom and pop organizations that are now utilizing AI to solve particular problems, right? So we haven't really seen that stage yet. This is the stage of the hyperscalers. The big boys are getting their money, doing what they do. Apple just came out last week with their AI strategy, right? So the big boys, the infrastructure, the foundation organizations are setting up for this crazy play. Now here's where it gets real. So after the miners do their thing, now they get all of that gold. Let's take it to the 70s, 80s, 90s here in Brooklyn. We was the ones going downtown BK and copping the gold. Now we felt like it felt like we was a part of that ecosystem of the foundation companies, the miners who were making money getting that gold, and then they would sell it to the stores, and then the stores would sell it to the consumer.
Right.
You actually just the engine keeping everybody else paid.
Right.
And you're expending your resources. Right. And that's it. You're not getting anything.
You're like the end stop.
The end stop.
Right.
You're the consumer. You're the final consumer.
Right.
But you're not. Everybody else is getting from this, except for you. And that's where we found ourselves at. Right. Like we was buying gold, platinum, whatever, ad nauseum.
Right.
We have an opportunity if we use that same model. So you got the foundation companies. We out that game. We're not setting up no.
Right. You're not battling NVIDIA.
You're not taking on Google, right? Like that's not gonna happen.
Right.
We're out of that game. We need to find ourselves in that. What we can't do, which is what folks want us to do, is just see us as using ChatGPT. So therefore, I'm using AI.
Right.
I'm prolific in AI because I know how to put a dope prompt into ChatGPT.
Right.
That's the same thing as us just buying
Copping
gold
from Albee Square Mall.
That's right. Copping gold from Albee Square.
Because nothing comes out of it. It's just you eat it, you digest it, and then you move on with it.
That's right. You might write a memo to somebody.
Right.
An email. 40 minutes quicker than you would.
Right.
And you feel like I'm the AI king, son.
Right.
And you really not.
Right.
You really not.
Right.
Because everybody else is making money, and you just did something that was pretty inconsequential.
And you paid to do it because ChatGPT is like $7.99 a week or whatever like that.
Because they tell you, we'll lock you out unless you pay us our little 20 bills.
Exactly.
So for us, we got to get in at that middle area because we can't get in at the foundation area. We got to get in at that middle area, which is standing up companies, starting companies, and turning our existing companies into AI-enabled companies that allows for us to 5x, 10x, 100x our impact, our revenue, our ROI, all of that stuff. And so that's where we need to get in at. It's not late. We at the right time. The problem is right now, the community, like literally, we have situated ourselves to be real fucking good at ChatGPT. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so we going into that same mode of we want to be consumers, but we want to be the flyest consumers you've ever seen.
Right.
Now let me give you an example. So that's from the theoretical standpoint. Right. Let me give you an example of an idea that I had that I think like, and I'll just throw it out there because I ain't gonna work on it. But think about what you can do, and forget ChatGPT for a second. The foundation of ChatGPT is a large language model, right? Just being able to understand language and understand text in all of its forms, right? So imagine, and you have been playing a very big role in the political space, right? Imagine if you could build a platform that went back into history here in New York City. City council, mayors looked at all the executive orders, looked at all of the laws that were passed, by whom, who sponsored them, how they were actually executed. So, and not only reading the laws, all of the local laws that were ever passed and executive orders that were ever passed by any politician, from mayor, public ad on down, since the beginning, and then read articles on how those things have done over time and so on and so forth, and then challenge your politicians to say, you know what? We in this church right now, and you're selling the good game because you want to get reelected. But I can tell you factually that one, historically, your policies have not worked. Historically, they would not work. If you actually did your research, I can tell you from 10, 15, 20 years ago that we've tried these things over and over again. It wouldn't have worked if you had actually thought it through. But not only that, the way you're talking now, you talked the same way 3, 4 years ago in a lot of your campaign stops. So why should I trust you now? We could put ourselves in a position, not only are we smarter as individuals around policy, right? Because none of us, not even me, not even you, is going to go back and read all of the policy that's ever been written by any person, right? But we can make ourselves not only smarter about policy, but we can also hold our politicians much more accountable and actually do what we're supposed to do, which is drive, vote the people that we believe are going to be helpful, not the people who say the easiest things and the nicest things.
In my work here in Bed-Stuy, one of the things I decided to do some years ago was get certified in hydroponics, right?
That's dope.
Because I wrote a curriculum on urban ecology, because at the time I was the ED of a nonprofit, Magnolia Tree Earth Center, and Magnolia Tree is kind of centered around environmental education, and so I wrote the curriculum to give it to the nonprofit. The nonprofit was like, we don't want you to do it, so I did it on my own. I became a DOE vendor, and I put it in schools. Part of my research in that work was realizing that the sustainability industry, even though it's one of the fastest growing industries in the nation, Black business owners only represent less than 1/10 of 1% of the industry, right? And that was bothersome to read because I know that agriculture is something that was centered in a native experience, in a Black experience. Like I grew up, the whole reason why growing things even registers with me is because my pops used to grow watermelons and peppers and tomatoes in the backyard, right? And so you sent me this article, this New York Times article about the sister that wound up being forced to resign.
Timnit Gebru.
Yes, because of her views about implicit bias in AI. And it got me to thinking, how, and you can speak to this with clarity for us, but how dangerous is implicit bias with regards to AI, given the fact that at Silicon Valley, you, brother, are a unicorn. It ain't 300 of you doing the work, right? And the sister the same way, a unicorn. Black women in Silicon Valley, that's a real
rarity.
Rarity. So how important is it for Black students and people matriculating into technology to find their way into working in the AI space? And is that a danger? Like, am I bugging? Like, is it a danger of AI having implicit bias because of the people who work on the paradigm?
So, man, you touched on a lot of key points. So I think the first thing I would say is, I think one, we have to accept the fact that bias is built into everything in every way, shape, or form. The problem with AI is that it gets scaled and accelerated at a rate that we haven't seen before, right? So one, I'm not as concerned about bias, generally speaking, because bias is there and there are ways for biases to correct themselves and so on and so forth organically. But with AI, the bias is magnified 20, 30, 50, 100x. It gets scaled. And then the bias seeps into a lot of our systems at a rate that we don't quite understand. And the scariest part is 10 years from now, you know, it was like, remember when with the .com, when the internet boom happened, the internet was a thing. Now you can't sell a car that's not connected to the internet. You can't sell any electronic device that doesn't have internet connectivity, whether it's your doorbell, you know, whether it's a lawnmower. Internet connectivity is in everything. So now, 5 years from now, 8 years from now, when everything is AI enabled, but it's built with these biases, it's spread like wildfire. So bias in and of itself is not a bad thing because it is a natural occurrence. Bias exists because we exist.
Correct.
But AI has the potential of literally spreading that bias at a rate and in a way that we don't know how to combat. So that's one. Two is, to your point though, yes, if we don't have people building, but these are things, and you just mentioned it in your example. If we don't have people building the curriculum that look like us, think like us, understand things in the way that we understand them, you're going to leave out a whole population of people who can engage correctly, right? And so we do need more AI scientists who understand and think about things the way that we think about them, so that we can have a diverse group of people who are building and creating this technology. It's the same thing. For a quick analogy would be, remember how we were up in arms in Florida when the governor of Florida came out with the curriculum for African American studies for students, and it was like, how does he and his advisory group get to tell us what we should be learning and how we should be thinking about African American history?
Right.
It's the same thing.
Right.
You go into ChatGPT and typing in, you know, tell me about African American history and so on and so forth. You should also Google, show me a picture of all the engineers at OpenAI, and point to one that you think would be thoughtful and putting in the right information and the right biases such that ChatGPT could capture African American history in the right way, right? So it's like we're literally leaving the history of us up to a bunch of really smart engineers that don't look like us.
Right.
So I mean, you touched on it in a real way.
That kind of brings me to what I really want to talk to you about. You mentioned this initiative that you want to put together, this thing that it is that you want to do. Talk to me about that.
So, I was lucky enough, you know, I spent a few years at NVIDIA, which last week for a few days became the largest company in the world through market cap. But I joined NVIDIA when it was still just known as a video game company. And I had to explain to people what NVIDIA was. People was like, I've never heard of that company.
Right.
And I got
I never heard of it until 3 months ago.
Blew.
Right.
So I got a lot of equity, a ton of equity, and it's just exploded. Right. And so I'm sitting on resources, and for me, I felt as though in this conversation around what role that you sort of have been focusing this conversation on is what role can the black community, can our community have in this AI space? And we talked about that middle space, which is fertile ground of business owners, startup folks in the AI space. And so I said, look, let me take a portion of what I've been able to amass in terms of my equity at this amazing AI company.
Right.
So it's a thoughtful play for me because it's like I made this money through being at this AI company. Now I want to take a portion of it and set up an angel fund to invest in organizations that are run by people from our communities that are focused on solving problems in our communities. And it's not just about the money. So I want to invest in and fund, but also bring resources, because that's actually key. One of the things that I do in my current role is not only do I fund organizations, and you'll find that to be consistent in tech-based philanthropic organizations. You fund organizations, but then you also use your 500-pound gorilla status to say, hey, Microsoft, give them some free compute. Give them some free credit so they can use cloud.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Bring in-kind services to the table to support this investment.
Right.
So we'll give you $100K,
right.
but we'll also give you $300K worth of services and technology and capability. Right. So we've technically funded you $400K, right? And organizations and companies do that all the time.
Right.
You'll notice that in investments, they'll say this investor invested up to $4 billion worth of, up to $4 billion worth, right? And so that'll be $1 billion in cash, but $3 billion in a number of other things, right? And so what I want to do, because I have those relationships and I have those resources, the financial resources, and I have the relationships with all of these top companies, tech companies, what I want to do is start cutting checks for people who are thinking about ideas to use AI to solve really intractable issues in our community, but then also bring resources to the table. So to start that, I'm doing like classes, sort of these 5, 10, kind of what the way you were thinking about sort of building out this curriculum. I'm doing like 5, 10-minute classes because for our community, you have to build capacity. You can't just come in and say, yo, there's money here, come get it and let's pop off. You actually have to build capacity because we haven't been exposed to these things in a real way. So I'm building capacity. And then lastly, I'll say, like, for me, what was interesting about this play is what you normally see with people online who have a technical skill set, whether it's in finance, whether it's in business, whether it's in real estate or some other, they're building out these courses. And it's usually, how can you pay me to teach you something? Right. And I'm flipping that on his head, which is, how can I teach you something and then pay you to implement it? Right. And that's the strategy that I'm looking to build out, and I think these sorts of conversations are going to help us get there.
Have you kind of created the process? Like, so for example, if I'm watching this and this is something that I feel like may be in my space, what is it that I need to do to contact you? How do I contact you? What are the qualifications, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Can like any dude be like, yo, fuck it, I'm doing AI now. Like, I'm changing up my whole shit. I'm gonna do AI. I'm gonna get this money from home. What is it? How does a person find themselves available to the information, to the master classes, which what you're doing, and ultimately to being funded?
So I think right now, I'm a novice in all of this except for the technology side. So right now, I've started up my Instagram profile. And I'm getting content out there, and that's one way for me to engage. And so if you're interested, just start a conversation in my DMs, in the comments. Just start a conversation, asking questions, because part of this is I want to start conversing with folks, right? I want to start engaging, understanding how you're thinking about things. Ask me questions. And so building the community, and I know that has to come through multiple channels, and so we'll look at multiple channels. But let's start there. I think on the technical side, from my role here at this fund, at the Bezos Earth Fund, I know that there has to be a lot of legal pieces put into place.
Absolutely.
And so there's a foundation that I have to build out in order to cover myself, in order to cover the people we're working with, and so on and so forth. Because you can't just cut a check and say, do you, right? Like, there has to be all sorts of legal pieces put together. So I'm working on that now to be able to ultimately launch this idea shortly. But the key thing here is start the conversation. Right. Let's engage, because we can get started on a number of things prior to cutting a check. I just want to hit on your piece, which is, look, a good idea is a good idea. Good ideas come from. Anyway, let me give you a quick story. Like, these are the sort of the anecdotes that really pushed me in this space. And so when I graduated undergrad, I told you I was an intern at Motorola. I went and worked at Motorola full time. So when I was living in Chicago working at Motorola, they would have a bring your child into work day at Motorola. So the lady who used to clean the area that I worked at, you know how it is when you're one of very few black folks.
Right, you get
when you
connected
see the
with
facility,
the
all black
doorman,
folks,
right, the maintenance, like you get connected.
Those is the
immediately.
homies.
Right.
Y'all chop it up all the time.
Right.
So she used to clean the area, and so we was cool. We was super cool. So she was like, you know, I want to bring my son up, but he's not gonna want to hang with me. I think I would love for my son to hang with you. So I was like, yeah, I bring him up. I was in my 20s at the time, but I was like, bring him up.
Right.
Kick it.
Right.
For bring your son to work day.
Right.
Bring your child to work day. So Motorola used to have this First Robotics. Motorola used to fund and donate to First Robotics. So for that, for the Bring Your Child to Work Day, they would turn this whole area into like a whole First Robotics competition space. And so all of these kids who were coming onto the campus, coming to the company, could hang out and watch these robots compete. So I took them over to one of the teams that was putting their robots together, and they was, you know, their job was to talk to the kids and explain what they was doing. So, you know, these was all non-black kids. So I had the one black kid with me. And so they was explaining how they make the robot go, and then one of the guys was like, yeah, but we aren't able to get 360 motion from our robot. It's been challenging, blah, 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 blah. And the kid was like, well, how about you put wheels on this side of the robot, this side of the robot. He basically took about 20 seconds and gave them this idea, and the kids, the scientist that was there was like, yo, that's a good idea. That might actually work.
The young kid who was the son of the cleaning lady.
Yes.
Wow.
So he said, well, do you do robotics? He was like, nah. When my mom is moving garbage cans from one end of the office space to the other, she puts it on this dolly that has wheels on all sides of the dolly, so I can turn the dolly this way, and then when I push it, it also goes straight. So I've seen my mom use a dolly, and then when I'm helping her, I'm using the dolly. So he was like, just make the robot like the dolly. Put the wheels like the dolly. Make the wheels itself go 360, and then they straighten up when you go straight, and so on and so on. So it was his experiences working with his mom in facilities that helped him solve what these scientists thought was a tough problem. That helped, and he thought it was like, really, this is fucking simple. Just use a fucking garbage can dolly. That's all. And so I believe that ideas like that, we haven't really sourced from the community yet. There's tons of ideas about AI and how to use AI. So I'm open to all ideas from all people. You know what I mean? I'm gonna be very critical and challenge those ideas. But we have to open up this to all big ideas.
That's awesome. And I think, because what I think needs to happen is you have to represent a form of inspiration for the community, right? And we spoke about how kind of in your journey you became like, you know, in a space that people would assume certain things about who you were and who you weren't. But we know who you are, right? And so this work is going to give an opportunity for you to be centered with young minds who come from where you come from and who think like you think, but need that connectivity to move into a space, a connectivity that honestly you didn't really have coming out of this space.
But I had our crew in tech. That was the inspiration for me. It was interesting. I didn't have tech inspiration. But because our friendship was a different type of friendship, period, point blank. We had a different type of crew, a really motley crew of really interesting dudes. But even our friendship, the way we rocked with each other and the things that we did and the people we was around and the places we would go is what inspired me to keep grinding. You know what I mean? When you was doing your hip hop thing, and the next thing you know, you on mixtapes out of nowhere, and I'm like, shit, son, like, we was listening to me. We used to go up to 125th to get mixtapes, and now my man is on mixtapes. Those was the things that inspired me. You know what I mean? To keep moving in my lane. But yeah, you're right. Like, I didn't have technology inspirations, but we had us. You know what I mean?
Real talk. So real quick, how much time we got left? I just want to do a couple quick hits and we done. Oh, we got 12 minutes. Okay. So I just want to talk to you about some things that are currently in the trending internet space and get some of your opinion. First off, Terrence Howard. Did you see that? Did you see? Did you see that?
He's having fun with it. I'm mad at it.
So, did you see Neil deGrasse's? Yo, that was the way he served, bro. Very like
respectfully and intellectually and academically,
from a peer kind of standard. Why do you think Terrence Howard became such an enigma in the space of like pseudo-intellectual culture on social media? Like when he said 1 × 1 is 2, every dude that talks about flat earth and talks about these things gravitated immediately to that. And so I'm saying there's something there. Like, what is it that's missing in intellectual spaces and pseudo-intellectual spaces where you got minds that are searching for some shit, and then when someone says some shit like that, they just, what do you think that's about?
It's actually quite simple. There's this concept of like, in the tech space of, there are companies that happen overnight.
Right.
And then there are companies that have been around working on a particular science and a particular technology and innovating on that technology and building out patents on top of patents on top of patents. And it takes them 12 years, 15 years, and it's called hard problems.
Right.
These are hard problems.
Right.
And there are people who dedicate their lives to hard problems. What we like, what the world sees, and it's not just black folks, it's not particular to any group of people.
Right.
But nobody wants to spend 12, 15, 20, 30 years on the one problem.
Right.
So everyone gravitates to this idea of like, yo, I learned something new and I'm able to share something new.
Right.
And I didn't even have to put years and years of thought into it because Terrence Howard just dropped it for me. And I knew that was always the case. So now let me piggyback on that and put that out there. So this concept of new concepts, we're addicted to.
Right.
But true scientists know that's 15, 20, 30 years in the making.
Right.
Lay people like us, we gravitate to when Terrence Howard comes out of nowhere and starts dropping all sorts of, pseudoscience. Right. We like, yeah, that's gotta be a thing because that's new. That's really interesting.
And I knew that, and I fucking knew that already.
That was the case.
I knew that was the case.
I knew that had to be right. Like they had to been teaching us wrong math.
Right.
So I think it's just we're just interested in sort of getting knowledge without actually putting the investment into it.
The scientific method is very important, and I think that our community, and I don't want to say our community, let's say the layman, right? Because it's not just our community, right? It's United States of America, have a difficult time reconciling the importance of method and systems, right? And I think, so that's one of the things, when you talk about you and me and our kind of connection, one of the things that I think you've always been great at is systems.
Yep.
Like there were things that you and I would do that would prove out that even early on you were into systems. For example, we made up names for everybody. Yeah. We made up crew names, we made up names, we had sayings, right? And for me, it was all creative and not systemic. Yeah. But for you create, like it became a system. That's how we spoke. So we had an entire language, an entire vernacular based off shit that you and I made up at 135 Claremont, right? Even with the party situation, when we did the party on January 25th, it was me and you in front of Zola's computer. That was Zola's computer at the time.
That was Zola's.
Right.
She was at Dartmouth.
She was at Dartmouth.
Forced you to buy a computer when you enrolled at Dartmouth, and we had it.
Right, and we had it at the crib, and it was me and you sitting in front of that shit, and it was me spewing creative shit, and you applying it into systemic form.
But it's interesting you say that. So there's a quote that I like. I didn't create it. I heard it, but I use it a lot. It's we don't rise to the level of our goals. We devolve to the quality and the capability of our systems, right? So if you, so it doesn't matter if you have lofty goals, if your systems aren't in place and your systems aren't strong that could support you getting it, that's the only level you're going to hit is the level that your systems allow you to get to. Forget what your lofty goals are. So you're absolutely right. Like systems are important.
And that puts me to the next point I want to touch on real quick with you is the running thing, because you and I are both runners, and I can tell you that you were my inspiration. I always wanted to run, but when you started running, I remember having a conversation with you in like 06, 07, and you and I were talking about running, and you were telling me like, well, you know, start off slow. Most people only run 2 or 3 miles. Like, and so if you're doing 4 or 5 miles every couple of days, you above the curve. And I would kind of watch how you viewed running, right? And so when I really got deep into it, it became a way for me to manifest the importance of systems in my life. Like, running really taught me everything about who I am in this moment. Running has aided that. You know what I'm saying? So for you, like, what is running to you?
It's the same thing. So two quick ways that I would describe running. So for me, with everything that I have, and you and I are both fathers and family men, and devoted in a crazy way, to being fathers, right? We don't take that lightly. We don't fuck around.
Right.
With that, and then with the work that we have, there's no time for almost anything else.
Right.
And so for me, running is the only time I get an extended period of time, 1 hour, just to my thoughts. I don't gotta pick up the fucking phone. I don't gotta hear nobody else's voice. I don't gotta say nothing to nobody else. None of that. It's just me and my thoughts. And so for one, running is the thing that keeps me sane and gives me opportunity to just kind of think through things from the night before, and then get ready for the day coming. And then to your point, and I know we talk about this a lot, and we when it got down to marathons, that's when I began to understand the true power of running, which is, I always say, to finish your first marathon and then to finish every other marathon after that, it's going to take blood, sweat, and tears. And you realize that marathons don't get done just out of sheer physicality.
Right.
You have to be emotionally and mentally ready to take on a marathon.
Right.
Because physically, our bodies, if you're in marginally good shape, if somebody came down Green Avenue busting shots, we could go straight for 13 miles. We'd be pooped after those 13 miles, and we'd be fucked up. But our bodies physically can take us there. And you know this is the wall. By the time you get to 18, 19, physically, your body is like, nah,
Yeah,
you good.
You wildin'.
This ain't real. Like, you ain't supposed to be doing this.
Right.
So at that point, your mental has to take over. And so for me and you, it was a way of sharpening our mental.
Right.
You know,
That's
like it was a way of pushing us mentally to say we can accomplish the things that we need to accomplish. However, you know what I mean? So yeah.
Real quick, the first time 2 minutes, all right. The first time I ever ran myself empty, the first time I ran 20 miles, I felt empty physically, but I felt empty mentally. Like, it was the first, I had never felt that in my life, where I felt like I had processed through every thing that was in me, and I was kind of left like, well, what do I do now? Like, how do I, like, what is this space, you know? So
that's why when you see people crossing the finish line and they crying, they not crying because their legs hurt. Now, their legs hurt and all that shit hurts. They not crying because of that. It's because they experienced that.
Right.
And they like what is happening to me?
What just happened? Because I was able to transcend my physical limitations only through mental. The first time I finished a marathon, I can't remember running back in Central Park. Like, when you go up Fifth Avenue and you go Black Cat Hill, it was a blur the first time. Because I wasn't physically or mentally, everything was gone. I was just giving it to God type of thing.
That's right.
You know? One last thing, Kendrick, Drake. Give me your thoughts. We got a minute left. Give me your thoughts.
So, here's my thing. One is, looking at the concert he just did in LA.
Yeah, pop out.
If you're gonna be success comes, and this goes to the conversation, this whole conversation we just had, being of, with, and for the people is always the model of success.
Absolutely.
Period, point blank.
Absolutely.
Period, point blank.
Right.
You know, and at the end of that concert was when he did They Not Like Us 5 times in a row, and the whole crowd stayed with him 5 times in a row.
Right.
But then at the end of the concert, when all of those people from the community came up, like, he differentiated. Forget rap skills. Like, we could go bar for bar and all of that, and we could go over who was nicest and whose joint was nicest.
Right.
But the fact that he showed, like, I'm of the people.
Right.
And I'm with the people, and I do this because of.
Right.
And Drake sits himself above, always positions himself above.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Kendrick turned what was a basic battle into a movement in that moment.
100%.
And it crystallized things. I've never seen nothing like that in hip hop. You know what I'm saying? Love you, boy.
Brother,
thank
I
you
love
so
you, man.
much. Thank you so much for this.
Sir,
you know what I'm
yes,
saying?
sir.
Michaela Delassie. Michaela!
No, they was waiting to come out.
I can hear them behind us.